And I'll move on to our second speaker, Professor Kevin Morgan. His title for us will be Something Can Be Done, which is encouraging, The Good Food Revolution in Schools, Hospitals and Prisons. And Kevin is Professor of Governance and Development, School of Geography and Planning at Cardiff University. Over to you, Kevin. Thank you.
Good morning, James. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, we can hear you, and I can see your first slide. This is Chris.
Okay, and I hope you can operate the slides because I've been forced to use my phone because my laptop isn't working. Are you okay to use my slides?
Yes, James is ready.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, good morning, everyone. I'm going to, for 15 minutes, very briefly talk about something that can be done to address the challenges of what Christina has just outlined so brilliantly in the last 15 minutes or so. And I'm going to look at the role of the public sector. So, James, if you could kick off the slides, please. I'm going to talk about a book I've written about what we can do and the origins of this book. On the next slide, James, please. The origins of this book are over 20 years of research into public food systems, what I call the public plate for short. It began with a project in Powys, which tried to get local food into a local hospital, and it failed abysmally. But as we know, failure can be instructive if we care to learn the lessons. And I argue that the public plate can play a big role in helping to counter the scourge of ultra-processed food. Next slide, please. The reasons for the failure of the Powys project, to cut a long story short, were to do with perceived procurement regulations in the EU, but also complex tendering procedures that were too complex and time-consuming for local suppliers. But the biggest shock of all, I was a rookie at this stage of my career, this was my first foray into food policy studies. The most shocking thing of all was to discover that NHS audit conventions couldn't account for the health gains of nutritious food. That was a real shocker. And many of these barriers to what I call sustainable food procurement in the public sector still exist in the UK today, over 20 years onwards, except EU procurement regulations, obviously. Next slide, please, James. So what I try to argue in this book on public food procurement, I try to argue in three parts. That part one sets the scene for what I call the agri-food polycrisis, to show how food is implicated in three of the great crises in this polycrisis. That is to say, climate change, biodiversity loss, and the epidemic of diet-related diseases associated with ultra-processed food. And I argue that the public plate, public procurement, the power of purchase, if you will, can help us to address these challenges and promote a fairer, healthier, and more sustainable food system if it can substitute a values-based procurement system for the neoliberal approach which has dominated political life in the UK and in other countries like the US for the past 40 years. And that neoliberal procurement approach has really allowed low cost to masquerade as best value. And next slide, please, James. At the heart of the book is an analysis of three public sector food systems: schools, healthcare, and prisons. In schools, I look at the need for us to promote what I call the whole school approach, which simply means aligning the pedagogy of the classroom with the provenance of the food in the dining room. And then I look at two major trends that are sweeping the school food movement internationally. Number one is the trend towards universality, the slow but sure drift towards universal free school meals. That's the social innovation involved in school food reform. And secondly, the other great trend is an ecological innovation, the rise of plant-rich menus. As more plant-based meals substitute for traditional meat dishes. This is not anti-meat, but it does involve less meat, but better meat. Turning to healthcare, I argue that the great challenge there is to overcome the Sisyphean problem that hospitals have been presented with. Hospitals in fast food nations are quite simply being set up to fail because they have been asked to provide a clinical solution to the societal problem of ultra-processed food. And that's quite simply mission impossible. And I show how this is the case. In the case of prisons, I look at the rise of the carceral diet, what I call the carceral diet, and its discontents. And I'll say more about this in a moment. But at the heart of the chapter is an analysis of the Clink charity. For some of you will be familiar with the Clink charity, which tries to use food service, chef skills, cooking skills, front of house skills, food service skills to equip prisoners that on release they can gain access to gainful employment, and how food can offer hope and dignity to prisoners to help them to rehabilitate themselves. Next slide, please, James. And then the final part of the analysis is to look at the rise of what I call the good food movement, which really consists of civil society organizations working in concert with public sector bodies like local authorities or NHS trusts, for example. And I look in particular at two of the most effective civil society organizations in the UK, the Soil Association and Sustain, because these two organizations have punched above their weight and they've helped the public sector to view and value food in new ways by creating what I call foodscapes of hope. Next slide, please, James. These are two examples of what I mean by foodscapes of hope. That the Good Food for All project has been run by the Soil Association, and it's an example of putting the whole school approach into practice through the Food for Life program. And I look at the pros and cons of this in the United Kingdom. But this is the gold standard, in my opinion, of public food procurement in the UK. On the right, Good Food for London is an example of Sustain. Sustain has done something here which has been enormously beneficial for food system reform. They've put hitherto unavailable information in the public domain, and they've shown a graphic of every London borough, what it's doing on food system reform. And it's, if you like, it's a name and shaming device. But what it does, putting this information in the public domain, allows citizens to see what's happening in their locality. And this is leading to what I call a race to the top, because it raises awareness, it galvanizes action, and then it catalyzes change as boroughs try to improve themselves. Next slide, please, James. If we turn to the United Kingdom as a whole, we can see a growing lottery. The UK is polarizing in terms of good food policies. Scotland, Wales, and the London boroughs have pioneered universal free school meals for all children in state primary schools. England is now a laggard in terms of not following suit, and the Starmer team claims that they don't need to follow suit and have a universal free school meal system, because instead they're developing a free breakfast scheme. Breakfasts are good, clearly, but they can never be seen as the nutritional equivalent for a hot midday meal. And that's the struggle we've got on our hands facing England. They need to catch up and smell the coffee. Next slide, please, James. Turning very, very quickly to to the healthcare issues. Can we pass over these slides, James? Because I haven't got time to cover Malmo, which I argue is a world-class example of a sustainable school food system. You can see it in the slides that David's made available. If we turn to health, these are two of the most important health reports that have been published, in my opinion, in living memory. The independent review showed what needs to be done within hospitals, and the core recommendation is to integrate the functions of procurement, catering, and waste management by harnessing the key professional functions to get a holistic approach. On the right is the House of Lords report, where Lady Walmsley chaired it and was the guest speaker at Christina's food symposium this week. And this highlights exactly what governments need to do to fix a broken food system by introducing a food strategy, mandatory standards, and ensuring compliance with those standards. Next slide, please, James. Because when we think of healthcare, we tend to think of hospitals, but we need to think of the social determinants of health, as Michael Marmot and other people have reminded us. And one of the key Cinderellas of the public food system is Meals on Wheels, which is disappearing rapidly because it's not a statutory service. As we can see, the decline of the Meals on Wheels service but in each nation of the United Kingdom. Next slide, please, James. And Meals on Wheels is so important because it enables us to address some of the greatest challenges of an aging society, one of which is loneliness, of course. And loneliness in time translates into healthcare issues, and it ends up undermining independent living of senior citizens, and many of whom end up in hospital, costing a fortune. So even from a fiscal point of view, this doesn't make sense. So Meals on Wheels needs to be integrated with good food policies in healthcare generally. Next slide, please, James. Moving quickly along to prisons, where we see our most wretched problems of all, I compare the fight, the quest for good food in British and American prisons. And I argue and try to demonstrate that struggles around nutrition lie at the heart of many prison protests and lie at the heart of reform to try to rehabilitate prisoners. And the clink strategy is one way to do it. The next slide, please, James. The clink, and the next slide, please, James. Let's cross over that as well. Oh, I've forgotten to put the clink strategy. The clink strategy basically involves both food service training within the prison and also mentoring outside the prison to link prisoners with gainful employment through links with employers. I can send people the information if they require. What I want to do, because of time pressures, I want to show you two faces of the future of school meals in England. As you may know, England is radically different from Scotland and Wales in the sense that in Scotland and Wales, we still have local authorities playing a big role in food provisioning. In England, it's fragmenting rapidly. On the left there, More Than a Meal, is the first independent evaluation of the universal free school meal system that Mayor Khan has introduced in London. Already it's showing up the positive social health benefits of free school meals. On the right, sadly, is the story, the tragic story of Oldham in Greater Manchester. In my book, on the very first page, I'm extolling the record of Oldham because although it's one of the poorest towns in England, it won the first ever gold award for its school food policy. So an outstanding municipal service. But last year, this was the report to council, which said that Oldham is going to have to shut up shop. It is closing its school catering service because it can't afford it in the face of escalating food price inflation and the declining number of schools that are contracting with the council because of the spread of academies in England. It's a really tragic story. Next slide, please, James. Fortunately, in Wales and Scotland, we are creating national institutions to foster rather than frustrate school food reform. Scotland has got Good Food Nation. In Wales, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And this is what England needs to adopt as well. And the final slide, James, is the next one, I think, which is the public sector finally is getting its act together on food, on public food, and creating a much stronger public sector catering alliance. Sadly, this alliance is still not being invited to the top table in government circles to talk about food. At the moment, the public sector has applied to get a seat at the table, but DEFRA, the government ministry in charge, has said the public sector is already represented at this table, and it's being represented by the boss of Compass, the world's largest food service company, which is I don't know a better illustration of the Cinderella status of the public food sector than the DEFRA rejection letter and saying the public sector can be represented adequately by Compass. And that shows the way we have to go to raise the political visibility and political power of public sector food procurement. Thank you very much, James.
Thank you so much, Professor Morgan. That's absolutely fascinating. You've again given us all sorts of angles to think about. I've got a note already about polycrisis and that combination of the three rather strong messages on climate change, diet-related diseases, and biodiversity loss, but then also a clinic for health, a clinical solution to a societal problem, naming and shaming, a race to the top, and then the clink strategy. So fantastic what we've got to think about and discuss in the second half.